Hello, thank you so much for joining us on Facebook. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, Principal Worldwide Evangelist for Adobe. And for the next 25 minutes, we're going to be talking about some of the latest innovations coming to the next version of Premiere Pro. And we're going to start by focusing on some of the latest updates to the Lumetri Color panel. Now, if you've been following Premiere Pro for some time, you know that with each update, we've been doing more and adding more functionality, flexibility to Lumetri Color. And one of the common requests that we were hearing from users was it would be great to have the ability to simply, in a layer-like fashion, stack multiple instances of Lumetri from within the panel. Now, this is something that you already can do today in the current version. The problem is that you're having to do that within the effects controls panel. So you end up with a situation like this where you have, first of all, very sort of limited control in terms of how you navigate this inside the panel. And you can imagine once you have things twirled down and you've got multiple layers of Lumetri happening here, this UI is not elegant. And this is not an ideal situation. So we wanted to rectify that. So now, listening to you, you will see at the top of the Lumetri Color panel, just next to our effects bypass, which was added in the April release, you will see a drop-down where now you have the ability to layer multiple levels of Lumetri right here inside the panel. So you can see on layer 1, we've named this Alexa LUT, where we're using basically the basic corrections here to add our Alexa input LUT, and we could maybe do a couple of additional pre-grade adjustments here. And then I've created a second layer called Hue versus Sat, which I'm going to rename, and I'll call this Selective Color. All right. And on each of these layers, of course, we have complete independent control. Here on Selective Color, again, I could do some additional tweaks to the content. All right, maybe punch up the highlights a bit, maybe add a little bit of vibrance, some faded film, and perhaps a vignette. And at any point in time, I can enable or disable these layers just as if I were in Photoshop. So again, I can bypass this one. I can go back to the Alexa LUT, turn this off, or maybe go into the Alexa LUT layer and change or remove the input LUT. You get the idea. Completely flexible, easy to use, easy to navigate. I can add another Lumetri layer here and give it an additional name. So again, very easy now to organize and find these things. And if you like to stack grade your content, so for instance, perhaps you'll have your pre-grade layer, and then you'll have your secondary layer, and then maybe you'll have a third layer which allows you to add sort of a broadcast safe layer of grading to your content. It's very easy to navigate and enable or disable these right inside the panel. So we're really, really excited to bring those to you in the next version of Premiere. Okay, but now I get to show you what is probably my favorite new feature across all of the latest updates in the applications, which is something called Selective Color. And this is where we are now bringing to you completely new, reimagined curves. 5 new curves in the form of Hue versus Sat, Hue versus Hue, Hue versus Luma, Luma versus Sat, and Sat versus Sat. And in bringing you these new curves, well, it meant that we had to get rid of one thing, which was the previous hue saturation wheel. You may remember that. You've probably used it before. Non-standard, circular, not so easy to navigate. You could add multiple control points, and basically it was just a hue versus saturation curve is what it was. It wasn't particularly responsive and fast. If you needed to make adjustments, you were confined to this very limited UI. And we heard this from customers. We heard that it wasn't the most ideal. But in redesigning these, it was truly a design issue that we were wanting to solve here. How do we reimagine curves that people already know that are so standard in other grading apps? We want to make it familiar, but we also want to make it more intuitive and give the user experience a bit of a boost. So this is what we've done here. So first and foremost, you'll notice that they're now presented in a more traditional horizontal fashion. And we're going to start with hue versus saturation to just pump up the saturation of some skin tones and perhaps some of the blue of the sky here. So I'll start by taking the familiar Adobe eyedropper, come over to her skin, to her face. They're the same. And make a selection. And when I do that, you'll see that you're presented with 3 control points. Now this is where this gets really cool. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to constrain this particular hue, the center control point being the exact hue that you clicked upon. When I click this now and I go north of the line, you can see that, of course, we are increasing saturation of the skin tone. And when I go south of the line, I'm decreasing saturation. But I want you to look at the user interface. Look at what you see. The vertical line here is telling you visually, you can see it's more orange, more of that skin tone as we go north of the line and towards white, towards full desaturation as we go south of the line. So for someone who's getting into color, trying to understand how to grade, how to make these adjustments, it's very intuitive because there's lots of visual indicators to show you exactly what is happening. Super cool, reimagined. Let's take another sample here in the sky. Again, here's our control point. You can, of course, add additional control points. You can widen the range if need be. All right, you could add something here if we wanted to. Let's give this a little overall boost, something like that. And again, each and every time you get this wonderful visual indicator. Now, something else I wanted to point out here because we're talking about skin tones. Now, traditionally, again, if we were talking about working with reds, we'd be in a situation like this, right? This is kind of the standard position of the graph, where if I were working with the skin tones, with the reds, I'd be kind of fighting this. Now, again, if you're someone who's a colorist, this is totally normal for you. As a non-colorist, I'm going, I don't really understand this. And maybe that's on me. But we wanted to reimagine this. We wanted to make it more intuitive. Why should I have to fight the edges of a graph to control reds? So, the brilliance of our engineers, we added a slider here. So you can drag the hue that you're focusing on, that you're working on, clearly into view, right? Truly reimagining grading with a hue versus sat curve, all right? That sounds like marketing, and it is, but it's true. Woo, thank you, Adobe employee. You have to see it. You have to try this, okay? Play a couple of these examples here. Kind of show you some of the things we've done. Actually, let me scrub ahead. By the way, you'll also notice the playback performance in this version is vastly improved, so much faster, particularly when you have multiple layers of lumetry. This is a limitation you would have felt in the existing version. You're going to see an enormous speed up in this latest one. You can also see that I'm at full quality on all of this 4K content here. Here we had this green tarp in the shot, and it was just really, it was throwing off the central character. There was so much color and so much saturation here that you were sort of losing what was happening in the foreground. So this was a perfect example of where we used hue sat, took a sample of that green, you can see it right here, and we simply desaturated that to allow our eyes to stay focused on our characters in the center of the shot, okay? Really nice, really easy to use, and easy to understand. Okay, so I'm not gonna cover all of these. We're gonna do hue versus hue and hue versus luma. So let's go to hue versus hue. So again, hue versus sat, allowing us to adjust the saturation of a particular hue. Hue versus hue, allowing us to change or readjust a hue, an existing hue. And in this case, I wanted to take the colors of these girls' dresses and maybe match it to the color of this magenta of the other girls' t-shirts. I thought it would be cool to sort of have them all coordinated. So I'm going to take the eyedropper here. I'm going to make a selection on the dress, just like this. But once again, here's where we've reimagined to not only empower you when using this curve, we're empowering color correction, color grading. It's not only going to empower you, but it's going to tell you exactly what's happening. So now when I click upon this, instead of seeing saturation, we're seeing, again, a vertical representation of that color graph. So if we go south, you can see that we're moving towards the oranges, the yellows, the greens. Or if we go north, let me zoom back out so I can match the hue perfectly, we can find that magenta, just like that. Wind it back, hit play. Of course, we can enable or disable this in real time, uninterrupted playback. This is something we've had in Premiere for some time, all right? Very easily adjust a hue with a simple click of the eyedropper, all right? Really, really nicely done. All right, the last one I'll show you here is hue versus luma. And this is something that, this always was a bit elusive to me. But again, in understanding how these work now, we're adjusting the luminance of a particular hue. And in this shot, I wanted to add a bit of color contrast with that blue sky. It's a bit too, there's too much luminance there. I wanted to decrease the luminance to give it a bit of a darker, more contrasty look, which would subsequently also affect the darkness in the reflection in the water there. So again, hue versus luma, we take our sample, which is this point here. And again, take a look at our graph now, right? Luminance adjust. Brighter, darker. You can see it's brighter towards white as we go towards the top, darker into black as we go towards the bottom. And if I zoom out, take a look at our blues there. Okay, we don't want that. We're blowing them out now and adding some artifacts to this shot. So let's move down here. Nice little color contrast, and we're good to go. All right? So easy to use, so effective, beautiful result, multiple layers of lumetry happening simultaneously in real time. Very excited to bring these new reimagined curves to you. All right? Cool. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the changes that we've made to motion graphics templates, or using motion graphics templates inside of the next version of Premiere Pro. So for those of you unfamiliar, motion graphics templates were introduced last year at Adobe Max. And they are just that, templates, which typically will contain some kind of animated motion element, whether it's an animated lower third, it can be an animated title sequence, it can be an animated transition or background element. These can be created natively in Premiere. These can also be, and more commonly, authored in After Effects to take advantage of all of the cool things visually that After Effects can do. And once they're authored, the After Effects designer or the Premiere designer then makes certain editable fields for these templates. All right? So in the case of this particular one here, we have this animated graphic created in After Effects with just a couple of data points. All right? Recurring dreams, 83% of women, 44% of men. Now, the designer only gave us two editable fields here, the value angle of these two fields here. Not very exciting. But you'll notice this new spreadsheet section here. This is something which Carl Soule will show and go into greater detail later when talking about motion graphics template authoring in After Effects. You can now bring in spreadsheet data via a CSV or TSV file to drive the motion graphics template. This is known as data-driven graphics. This is something that we introduced in After Effects a couple of updates ago. Now you'll have the flexibility of bringing that into a motion graphics template, which can then be used in Premiere. So in the case of this, we might be using or wanting to use the same graphic for different bits of data without having to manually type that data in. So I can choose to edit spreadsheet data, come over to my browser. Let's go ahead and choose this CSV right here. When I do that, you'll see the data will update immediately. And now it's reading the data directly from that CSV file. Now, by nature, because it's coming from the CSV, there's no editing in this window. But if we go to one of the text fields here, we can change it to unmapped, and this will allow you to override it. So I can instead say add home to at IBC, and when I click OK on that, you can see that it updates instantly. Okay? So a way to drive the data for a motion graphics template via CSV or TSV files. But here's where this gets really cool, and maybe even a bit more understandable as to why you'd use something like this. I tend to use a lot of lower thirds. Think about, if you're working in broadcast, think about whenever you use lower thirds, and you've got a lot of people on screen, whether it's documentary filmmaking, anything, and you're constantly changing the name of who's on screen and their role and perhaps what they're talking about or their location. You're using the same variation of the graphic, but you're constantly changing the data in that motion graphics template. Well, I wouldn't want to have to manually type in all these names. This is typically something that could be contained in an Excel file, in a CSV file. So here the motion designer gave us a couple of cool sliders, one of which is we can change these on the fly. So all of this is built into the template, and it's reading the data from an existing CSV. Now you'll notice here we also have some text controls and shadow controls. I'm going to come back to those in a moment. But once again, let's say now I'm doing the second iteration of this video. All new people, all new roles, all new names. I don't have to do any manual typing. I can simply go to a new spreadsheet. Let's grab it here, click open, all right? And instantly all of that new data populates the spreadsheet. All new names, all new roles, new color schemes. You get the idea, all right? Really, really wonderful. Now, in terms of text controls, again, this is something Carl will show you later today. You will now have the ability, if you're authoring motion graphics templates in After Effects, to enable the editor in Premiere to change the font, the font style, and the font size. This was something that you cannot do today when authoring motion graphics templates in After Effects. You can do it on the Premiere side, not on the After Effects side. Coming in this next version, you will have complete flexibility to do that. And it's the same font menu that you all know. You can sort through your typekit fonts and your favorites, and you can make editable to the user of the template the font itself, the font style, and the font size. Okay? Really nice. You'll also notice that these twirl downs seem to hide different parameters inside them. That's because now, from within After Effects, you will also have grouping. You know, as we start to bring in more and more motion graphics templates, some of them get very complex. Some of the designers, they'll give you 50 editable parameters. It's not uncommon, especially if it's some kind of a transitional background element. Lots of editability, color, light. Remember, these can have Cinema 4D, 3D objects in them. They can have 3D lighting and camera tracking. So the designer can give you all of those parameters to edit if they so choose. But that means you're scrolling through the template to find all of those parameters. Now they can be easily grouped together, hidden and shown accordingly. And it's just for organization. It just makes it so much nicer. If you're curious about seeing what we have in terms of motion graphics templates, from within the Essential Graphics panel at the top, you'll now see an Adobe Stock button. And this allows you to search on motion graphics templates directly from within Premiere Pro. Search, preview, and license, download, whatever you want. There's lots of free ones. There's also premium paid ones. I go to this free one here because this was actually created by none other than Andrew Kramer, whom many of you will know as Video Copilot. I'm still amazed that he made us free ones. I can't believe we got these from Andrew. It's pretty amazing. But you can see, it tells you it's free, it tells you how long it is, the size, the fonts that it uses. And this is, again, where typekit is so cool being in Premiere, because if you don't have the font that Andrew chose and you grab this template, you'll immediately get a pop-up, just like in Photoshop, that says, oh, you need Attremont Regular. Would you like to synchronize that to the desktop? And that's it. So you'll always have these displayed properly. You don't have to use typekit fonts. I don't typically say that on these. I haven't said that this week. You can use whatever font you want. The idea with typekit, though, is that if you're giving these to someone who's obviously using Premiere, this will always ensure that it will display properly, because they can always synchronize your font. If you're using a font from some third party that the editor doesn't have, you're going to have to give them that font, otherwise it's not going to look the same. All right? So amazing flexibility with motion graphics templates in this next version of Premiere Pro. Okay, let's see. Let's go to VR 180. Bounce back to my color workspace here. So this is something which is really best experienced just behind me here at the pods. And those of you who've been following us and what we've been doing in the virtual reality space for some time now with VR 360, in this next version of Premiere, we will also natively support VR 180 stereoscopic editing as well. So this is just some content that I happen to shoot with a Zcam Pro 6K in my backyard, which typically, I live in the desert, and typically it's a real jungle back there. There's, on any given day, I will see a coyote or some kind of a bobcat, tons of lizards, crazy huge birds, snakes, maybe spiders, I don't know, and there's always sounds and noises and of the desert. Something's always happening. On this particular day, there was nothing. So there's really, unfortunately, nothing terribly exciting to show you here, except the fact that this is, in fact, VR 180 stereoscopic. You'll see that I'm viewing this in anaglyph mode, and if you're wondering why it looks a bit soft, I've also, just for my cases, implemented a proxy here because I'm just editing 6K. But if you go into the VR video settings, if you don't choose to work in anaglyph, you kind of just, of course, choose, left eye, right eye, and then work this way accordingly. The really nice thing about VR 180, and what you need to know about this if this is something you're looking to get into, is that the workflow for you, if you've been using 360, doesn't change. The ingest is the same, the proxy creation is the same. What you'll see are new sequence options, some new presets, also some new export presets. It still supports ambisonics in the same way. But effectively, all the same effects and filters that you know can still be applied. And in the case of this one here, you'll see some maybe additions to those effects that support specifically VR180. In the case of this one, something like disparity adjustment. So if we wanted to, widen or narrow the stereo here, you're going to see these controls inside of a lot of the existing effects that you already had. Again, working with text, it's exactly the same. This one needs to be adjusted. Same thing here in VR plane to sphere. You'll see a stereo disparity option here as well. So, lots of flexibility with how you work with this, but it doesn't change if you've already been doing it in the 360 domain. Now just supported natively. And this happens to be some, again, side-by-side shot with the Z-Cam. So support for VR180 stereoscopic and ambisonics as well in this next version of Premiere Pro. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to show you here is something which I think any editor will truly appreciate, is that we will now be offering some new denoising and de-reverbing algorithms inside the Essential Sound panel for Premiere Pro. So if you're wanting to subtly, carefully, transparently remove noise, you've been able to do it in the past. We had an adaptive noise algorithm here. But the algorithm was a little bit older, and it took a bit of time to actually adapt and thus kick in. So you'd sort of end up with this gated sound. Yes, I see shaking heads. That was bad. We know this. That's gone. You have a brand new algorithm in here. You're not really going to be able to hear it in this venue, but it functions the same way, right? You still have a single slider displayed to you in Essential Sound. For those of you not familiar with Essential Sound, like Essential Graphics, was developed to give an editor who's maybe not a sound pro the ability to mix sound with minimized control. These are all intelligent sliders. It's not just on, off, more or less. There's a lot of Adobe Sensei happening in here, machine learning to understand what's happening in the audio and react and fix and repair or process accordingly. So in the case of this, here, let me see what we've got here. Oh, that's very loud. Hold on.
Leave a footprint. Well, first you're gonna have to leave home. Go to the crazy place. Even if no one's coming.
There it is.
You're gonna have to itch to fail. Then start from scratch.
There it is.
If you're gonna take advice.
And I'm behind it, so I can't really hear, and I could overdo it, and of course it'll start to get a bit too much. The idea being that, of course, you can always go into the effects controls, and what this is really doing is applying noise reduction at the clip level. So this is the new UI for the new noise reduction effect. What's really awesome about this is when you play it back, first of all,
make sure you remember how to dance.
You get a nice graphical
because the beat of
display
your own drum is all you got in the end.
Of what's happening inside the audio. And then you have 5 different processing EQ curves, basically. The default being sort of all frequencies, so broadband noise. And then, again, you can see what's happening on the frequency graphs here. So this would be focusing on low frequency. If you had a lot of sort of low-end rumble type noise, that's an ideal one to use. Again, it won't touch anything in the mids and the highs, so you won't end up with those swishy, swirly, metallic artifacts. Very intelligent. Additionally, sometimes you do have noise that lives in that very vocal space, those fundamentals, so you can tell it to focus on the mid-range. Or, in the case of something like wind noise, now this is not the only thing you would use for wind, but you could use this EQ curve, which focuses on low-end rumble, common in noise, in wind, and then high-end sort of wispiness, right? Scooping out the middle. So it doesn't touch the mid-frequencies, which means you don't have those mid-frequency swishy, swirly artifacts, okay? Super intelligent, super intuitive. And one of the things that I've found in using this is that you actually will be, you use less with cleaner results, which is a good thing. And even so, you're using less, maybe you're even preserving a little bit of the room ambience or noise in there, but it sounds infinitely better. And that's just to do with a newer, cleaner, better algorithm. So can't wait for you to try this and get this in your hands. The other feature here is the de-reverb one. Now let me take a quick listen to this. I mean, that's not the track here.
The cold.
Okay, we'll put it back
and
on
ready
here.
To strike when the iron's hot.
Now, for de-reverbing, here's what I can tell you about this, and this is very hard to hear in this venue. Where do you want to use this? This is one of those holy grail requests. I have something that's very, very echoey, and the microphone was 100 meters away from the person speaking, and I want to remove all of that echo and make it sound like they're right in front of me. Easy to do? No. Virtually impossible? Yeah, kinda. Sorry. Just being real. There's a gazillion of these algorithms out there. This is the best one I've heard. Here's where this really shines. You have a take that's recorded off mic, off boom, off axis, and it is further away from the capsule. So you have some ambience that you otherwise have not been able to attenuate. You want to save that take. This is where this effect really shines. And in terms of user interface, much like the denoiser, it's the same thing here. So you have the same frequency selections. So you can implement this.
Well, first you're gonna have to leave home, go to the crazy place, even if no one's coming.
Right.
You're gonna have to itch to fail.
And just take out that ambience edge, right, to make it a little cleaner. And more importantly, now remember, and this is why I'm honest about this, because even the best de-reverberation, yes, you can remove echo and decay. Sure, frankly, that's not so difficult. The problem is the distance from the microphone, right? You can't take the mic and go and bring it back. But what this does intelligently to fake it, to fool you, is it's doing an AI-based auto gain. Because as you're attenuating sound and frequency, you're also attenuating amplitude. So it is dynamically readjusting the amplitude to simulate pushing that sound forward, to bring it closer to you, to make it a bit more intelligible and understandable. Make sense? So, new de-reverb, new denoising algorithms, absolutely essential, very cool, part of Essential Sound in both Premiere Pro and Audition. New selective color tools with 5 new curves reimagined for you, multiple levels of layers, stacked layers of Lumetri directly inside the Lumetri color panel, new data-driven graphics, motion graphics templates in Premiere Pro. We also have display color management in this next version, VR 180 stereoscopic support, and these are just some of the latest innovations coming to the next version of Premiere Pro. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day 3 at IBC. Thank you so much for watching us on Facebook. We'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye.